Welcome back, guys, to another Blender for Normal People tutorial. Today I'm going to be going over Blender's user interface setup and some tips and tricks to improve your workflow. So first of all, I actually have a magic trackpad, so I don't have any middle mouse button. I can scroll in and out, and surprisingly Blender actually supports the pinch. There you go. And the rotate mouse gestures, which is actually really nice. However, I can't pan, and you can't rotate in anything around the Z-axis, so really your navigation controls are very limited, and you're pretty boxed in. Well, what I can do here is in user preferences, the first thing I can turn on is emulate 3-button mouse. For anyone else out there who doesn't have a 3-button mouse, you can turn on this setting. And what basically it'll do is when you click with a left mouse button, holding Alt, it'll emulate middle mouse button. So there we go. Now I can do everything else that I need to do. So now that we've taken care of navigating the viewport without a 3-button mouse, if I want to go to the front view by pressing 1 on the keyboard, you can notice that I'm actually still in perspective mode. And if I go to a viewport, let's just pick the top one this time, and I press 5 to go to orthographic mode, and I come out of it, I am viewing everything in orthographic mode, which is really annoying and hurtful on the eyes. And it has its uses, but generally it just gets in the way for me. So one thing that we can also turn on here, and this is something I always turn on in Blender, is auto perspective. And what that'll do, if we go to the front view and then pop out into the 3D view, we'll automatically be back in perspective. And then if we go back to the top view, we're automatically back in orthographic. So that is a must turn on for me here. So let's say I wanted to create some text here, and I add a little thing of text. It's rotated the wrong direction, so I can rotate it X by 90, but if I'm adding lots of text here, if I add a plane, I've got to rotate it by 90. If I want to add a cylinder that's facing me, I'm going to have to rotate it by 90 on the x-axis. It can get really frustrating. Well, one thing that you can turn on in your user preferences under editing is align to and select view. So now if I'm to create another text object here, you can see it's aligned to view. One thing to note is that if you're not perfectly aligned to top, front, or right, if you're in the perspective mode and you add an object, let's add a cone, it will also be aligned to view. So that can be frustrating if you forget it. And then if you do add an object, you can always uncheck the align to view option here in the operator settings when you create it, and then you can still it'll still be set globally, but just for that one object. So if I add more text, it's still aligned to view, so it's not too bad to work with that. Alright, now let's say I wanted to create another scene in Blender, and this scene I wanted to have maybe some meta stuff in here. Who knows? And then I'm adding some materials to these guys. Make them blue. So now I got my material. Let's say I'm ready to start rendering this guy. And I want to go to the compositor to do that. If I click on compositing, you'll notice that I'm back to scene 1. Now, if you were to switch to a scene where you don't actually have the 3D viewport in, for example, video editing, you were actually still going to be in your initial scene, and you might forget that. And if you're doing anything important like rendering an animation, you might get really disappointed when you realize you've rendered the wrong animation. And so basically right now, these viewports here are driving the scene, or in other words, the scene is being driven by the viewports. So if I go back to default, you'll see I'm back to Z001. If I go to animation, I'm in scene. Now what we can do to turn that on in user preferences is in the interface, click global scene, which will make the scene drive the viewports, or the viewport driven by the scene. So now if I go back to the default, and always seems to not work the very first time for some reason. If I click on scene, click on back scene 001, go back to animation, it's driven by scene 1, video editing scene 1, compositing scene 1. If I go back to scene and go back to animation, it's driven by scene, scripting driven by scene. So now we're seeing that these viewports are now driven by the scene, which is much better for your workflow to have them driven in that manner. Right, another thing I want to talk about is sometimes you'll have things in Blender that scroll. Sometimes you won't be able to scroll enough. You have to keep grabbing and grabbing and dragging and grabbing and dragging. Well, what we can do, there's a really, really nice setting that I love to turn on under input called continuous grab. So now when we grab a setting and scroll, it is really awesome. Basically what it's calculating here is once this mouse gets over here, it actually automatically wraps it over there. We can see this effect better in the viewport. So if I scale an object and I move my mouse all the way to this edge, you're going to see my mouse jumped all the way over to this side of the screen. And do it once more, jumps all the way over. You can do it backwards, which is really nice for things like scaling. You just need to make it really, really big. Don't want to zoom out, who knows. Changing properties. If you don't have a numpad, like my original keyboard for my Mac here was the Bluetooth keyboard before I got the one with the numpad. You can emulate the number pad by clicking that, and when you click the top buttons, it will emulate the number pad, like it says, which is useful if you're on a laptop and don't have those buttons. I actually don't need to turn that on anymore, so I won't. I'm going to go to cycles now, and I'm going to talk about something that was driving me crazy for a while. It doesn't only manifest itself in cycles, I've seen it in other places as well. So I'm going to turn this into a rendered viewport. And now let's say I want to, actually I need this to be a new cycles material. Now let's say I start editing this color here. You notice that my color selector is glitching in and out of visibility. Well, that's because for some reason, if you go to system, the window draw method, the default one, automatic, sucks. It is horrible. However, if you turn it to overlap, and now you play with that setting, it is now much, much, much better. You don't have to worry about it glitching in and out. Alright, now once you've turned all of these settings on, you're probably going to want to save them so that you don't have to turn them on every single time you open up Blender. Well, one thing what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete all of my objects in the first scene. I'm going to delete my second scene. And now, if I select Save User Settings, or if I can go into User Preferences, save my settings there, or you can save them right here. Now when I say New, it is my default scene. If I close Blender and open Blender back up again, you'll see it starts off with my default scene. I can pan, I can add my stuff aligned to my viewport, can scale it continuously. Let's go to cycles. I can change, I can change settings without it totally glitching out on me. So that is the basic setup, or the way I setup blunder. Yeah, so I really hope that is able to save you time. It's all definitely been a time saver for me having those settings enabled. Go ahead and like if you like the video, comment, and let me know what I can improve on. Have a great day, guys.